When Barry Windham said he hated working with certain wrestlers, fans assumed it was just kayfabe talking, but the truth behind his grudges reveals a darker story about broken promises, stolen opportunities, and a career destroyed by the very people he trusted most. This is the list that explains everything. Barry Windham was supposed to be the guy. Standing 6'6" and weighing 275 pounds, he had the size of a monster and the skills of a cruiserweight. Born into wrestling royalty as the son of Blackjack Mulligan, trained by legends like Harley Race, Windham was groomed from day one to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Everyone in the business agreed he was the natural heir to Ric Flair's throne, but something went wrong. His career became a series of meteoric rises, followed by bitter exits and long disappearances. The reason why becomes clear when you look at the 10 wrestlers Windham truly hated. These weren't just professional rivals. They represented everything that went wrong in his career. Political backstabbing, unsafe working conditions, and a business that valued looks over talent. Each name on this list cost Windham something: his health, his money, his legacy, or all three. And the hate he carried for them shaped the final years of a career that should have ended in glory, but instead ended in resentment and chronic pain. Before we reveal who made the list and why, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me which wrestler you think betrayed Windham the most. Now let's get into the first name on his hate list, and trust me, this one hurt him more than any other. Ric Flair was supposed to be Barry Windham's mentor. In the mid-'80s, Flair took the young Windham under his wing and helped him navigate the treacherous world of NWA main events. Their early matches were instant classics, 60-minute time limit draws that proved Windham could hang with the best in the world. These matches established Windham as a legitimate threat to Flair's championship. But that's where the problem started. Flair needed challengers who could make him look vulnerable without actually taking his spot. Windham was the perfect victim for this system. He was talented enough to convince audiences he might win, but he was always booked to fall short at the last moment. Match after match, Windham came close, but never got the big one. This created what wrestling insiders call the glass ceiling. Windham was perpetually the groom, but never the bride. He could stand at the altar, but the wedding never happened. And Flair was the one holding the ceremony hostage. The bitterness really exploded in 1991. After years of teasing the moment, WCW finally had a plan in place. Flair would drop the NWA World Heavyweight Championship to Windham in a long-term storyline that would crown Windham as the new face of the company. This was it. Everything Windham had worked for since his debut was finally about to pay off. But then Jim Herd, the WCW executive at the time, got into a contract dispute with Flair. Instead of working it out, Flair made a shocking decision. He quit WCW and jumped to the rival WWF. And here's the part that destroyed Windham. Flair left while still holding the physical championship belt, the famous Big Gold Belt. The title was suddenly vacant and the entire storyline collapsed. WCW panicked and pivoted. Instead of giving Windham his moment, they created a new championship and handed it to Lex Luger. Windham was left adrift in the mid-card. He has said on record that Flair's exit ruined his career trajectory. It wasn't just a business decision to Windham, it was a personal betrayal. Flair sacrificed Windham's future to gain leverage in his own negotiations. The resentment from that moment never went away. But the damage Flair caused wasn't just political, it was physical. Wrestling Ric Flair came with a brutal cost. Their matches were intense and demanding, and as Windham got heavier and his knees started to break down, the toll became unbearable. The worst moment came at Beach Blast in 1993. Windham was defending the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Flair. He had recently undergone knee surgery and was still recovering. Within the first 5 minutes of the match, Windham blew out his knee again. The pain was catastrophic, but because it was a main event against Ric Flair, because the pressure to deliver was so intense, Windham kept wrestling. For nearly 30 minutes, he worked on a destroyed knee to finish the match and protect the storyline. That decision required complete reconstructive surgery. Windham was sidelined for over a year. The Beach Blast disaster wasn't an isolated incident. Just months later at Slamboree in May 1994, Windham faced Flair again and re-injured the same knee. This time, the damage was so severe that Windham disappeared from wrestling for 2 complete years. 2 years of rehabilitation, multiple surgeries, and constant pain management. During this period, Windham's relationship with painkillers deepened. The chronic pain from that injury and others like it led Windham to rely heavily on painkillers like Vicodin and Soma just to function. He traces his painkiller dependence directly back to the physical punishment of keeping pace with Flair. The pills became the only way he could move without agony, the only way he could sleep at night, but they also changed him. Friends and colleagues noticed Windham becoming more withdrawn, more unpredictable. The man who was once the most reliable worker in the business started missing dates and showing up in poor condition. Was it unprofessionalism or was it survival? Windham would argue it was both. He was trying to survive the aftermath of what wrestling with Flair had done to his body. So the hate Windham felt for Flair was layered. It was emotional disappointment mixed with physical suffering. Flair had taken his spot at the top and left him with broken knees and a pill bottle. Every time Windham looked at his scars or reached for pain medication, he was reminded of the matches that destroyed him. And the cruelest part was that Flair walked away mostly intact. Flair's career continued for decades, while Windham's prime ended in an operating room. The imbalance of that outcome fed the resentment. Windham gave everything to make Flair look good, and Flair's legacy grew while Windham's body crumbled. The second name on Windham's list is Lex Luger. And this rivalry was born out of pure frustration. Windham met Luger in the training rooms of Florida Championship Wrestling. Luger was a rookie, fresh out of the USFL, with an incredible physique but zero wrestling experience. Windham, already a seasoned worker, was tasked with teaching Luger how to perform. From the start, Windham saw that Luger was dangerous. He was rough in the ring, lacked spatial awareness, and had no control over his movements. During a cage match in Daytona Beach, Luger hit Windham with a wild elbow that opened up a deep gash on his forehead. Windham needed immediate stitches. For someone like Windham, who prided himself on working snug but safe, Luger's clumsiness was an insult to the craft. It showed a lack of respect for the business and for the safety of his opponents. The professional rivalry between them became famous in 1988 when Windham turned heel and joined the Four Horsemen. As part of the storyline, Windham cut brutal promos on his former tag team partner. In one iconic segment, Windham told Luger he was the perfect physical specimen but lacked execution. He declared the Horsemen the measuring stick and made it clear Luger couldn't measure up. Those words were scripted, but they reflected real sentiment in the locker room. Windham and the other Horsemen viewed Luger as an outsider who was pushed to the top purely because of his looks. Luger had the total package appearance, but he couldn't call a match or sell properly. The deeper problem was what Luger represented about wrestling's changing priorities. In the territory days, wrestlers earned their spots through years of learning the craft in small towns and high school gyms. They learned timing, psychology, and how to protect their opponents. Luger skipped all of that. He came from football with no wrestling background and was immediately pushed as a star because he looked like a superhero. This shortcut insulted everyone who had paid their dues the traditional way. Windham spent years perfecting his craft under legends like Harley Race and his father. He worked countless shows in front of tiny crowds, learning how to read an audience and structure a match. Luger walked in with muscles and got handed opportunities Windham had to scratch and claw for. That's what made the 1991 title situation so painful. When Flair left WCW, it was Luger who got the World Heavyweight Championship. The very title that was supposed to go to Windham ended up around the waist of someone Windham considered a bodybuilder pretending to be a wrestler. That's the ultimate insult in this business. Windham was the better wrestler, the better talker, and the deeper psychologist. But Luger had the look, and in the new era of wrestling, that's all that mattered. The hate Windham felt was the classic resentment of the worker versus the attraction. He did the work while Luger cashed the checks, and every time Windham saw Luger's face on a magazine cover or a pay-per-view poster, it reinforced the message that his skills didn't matter anymore. The business he loved was becoming a beauty contest, and technical excellence was losing to muscle mass in a tan. Dusty Rhodes is the third name. And this relationship shows how even mentors can become sources of deep bitterness. Windham revered Dusty as a teacher. Rhodes taught him how to cut promos, how to connect with crowds, and how to work the business side of wrestling. But that respect crumbled when Windham realized how badly he was being exploited. The most painful example came during Windham's time with Jim Crockett Promotions, where Rhodes was the head booker. After 2 weeks of brutal travel and high-profile matches, Windham received his paycheck. It was for $134. For 2 weeks of main event level work, Windham made barely enough to cover gas. That paycheck was a slap in the face. It told Windham exactly how much Rhodes valued his contributions. That financial insult was the main reason Windham quit the NWA in 1989 and briefly jumped to the WWF as the Widowmaker. He couldn't keep working for peanuts while Rhodes controlled the booking and the money. But the issues with Dusty went beyond paychecks. Rhodes had a famous booking philosophy known as the Dusty Finish. This was a creative trick where a babyface would win a title match, the crowd would celebrate, and then the decision would be reversed on a technicality so the heel champion retained. It was effective in short bursts, but Rhodes overused it constantly. The problem for Windham was that this finish killed momentum for rising stars. Every time Windham seemed on the verge of a breakthrough, a Dusty Finish would snatch it away. The Dusty Finish became a running joke among wrestlers, but for those caught in its cycle, it was career poison. Fans would get excited seeing their hero win, only to have their excitement crushed moments later. Eventually, crowds stopped believing in title changes altogether. Why get invested when you knew the decision would be reversed? For Windham, who needed big wins to establish himself as a main event player, this booking philosophy was a cage. He would have incredible matches, the crowd would believe he might finally break through, and then the rug would be pulled out from under him again. It happened so many times that even die-hard fans started to see Windham as someone who would always fall short. That perception became reality, and it was Rhodes who created it. Even worse, when Windham returned to feud directly with Rhodes, the booking always protected Dusty at Windham's expense. Windham has openly said that Dusty always beat him. To be an effective heel, Windham needed meaningful wins, but those wins rarely came. Rhodes insisted on keeping himself as the central babyface figure, even though his body was breaking down, and younger talent like Windham needed those spots. The hate here was about feeling like a secondary player in his own career. Windham's talent was being used to feed the ego of the booker, who should have been building him up instead. Every time Rhodes won, it sent a message. The old guard wasn't ready to step aside, and that meant stars like Windham were stuck waiting for opportunities that would never come. Sting is the fourth name on the list, and this feud represents a generational clash. Windham was a product of old-school wrestling where respect was earned through technical skill and toughness. Sting was a product of the MTV era, a high-energy face-painted superhero whose connection with fans had nothing to do with mat wrestling. Windham has been brutally honest in interviews about Sting. He flat out said Sting was not one of the greatest workers. The friction started during their feud for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Windham was the heel champion, which meant it was his job to lead the matches and make Sting look like a credible challenger. The problem was that Sting had major technical deficiencies. Windham and Flair had to actively coach Sting on basic babyface behavior, including how to engage the crowd and when to use signature gestures. The coaching sessions revealed just how green Sting really was. Simple things that veteran wrestlers did instinctively had to be explained to Sting step by step. How to build crowd heat, when to make a comeback, how to sell an injury convincingly. These were Wrestling 101 concepts that Sting was learning on the job in main event matches. For Windham, who had spent a decade honing his craft, this was insulting. He was putting Sting over and making him look like a world beater when Sting barely understood the fundamentals. Watching a relatively green wrestler receive massive crowd reactions and championship pushes felt deeply unjust. But it wasn't just jealousy, it was frustration at what Sting represented. The wrestling business was moving away from the gritty realism that Windham embodied. It was shifting toward a more cartoonish, character-driven product where someone like Sting could thrive. Windham's technical mastery and old-school psychology didn't matter anymore. The mass market wanted superheroes, not mat technicians. Sting's rise proved that Windham's entire skill set was becoming obsolete. While Windham maintained some personal affection for Sting as a person, professionally Sting symbolized everything that was wrong with wrestling's new direction. He was proof that the business Windham loved was dying and being replaced with something he couldn't compete in. Arn Anderson is the fifth name, and this hatred came from within the Four Horsemen itself. Anderson and Tully Blanchard operated as a political unit known as the Brainbusters. They used their tag team status to negotiate deals that often excluded other members of the stable. When Anderson and Blanchard left WCW for the WWF in 1988, Windham was furious. He viewed their departure as a move driven by ego and pride. Guaranteed contracts were starting to appear in wrestling, and Anderson and Blanchard chased better money. Windham thought this was short-sighted and damaging to the Horsemen brand. Their exit left Windham isolated in WCW and effectively ended the golden era of the faction. The timing of their departure made it even worse. The Horsemen were at a creative peak, drawing huge crowds and generating massive interest. Fans were invested in the group dynamic and the ongoing storylines. Anderson and Blanchard walking away mid-storyline forced bookers to scramble and rewrite months of planned television. New members had to be brought in who lacked the chemistry and history of the original lineup. The magic was gone, and it was Anderson and Blanchard's fault in Windham's eyes. But there was a deeper layer of disrespect. Windham has referred to Anderson in shoot interviews as a wannabe. He believed Anderson rode the coattails of the Horseman legacy, but lacked the individual star power to carry a company on his own. Windham felt he constantly had to do the dirty work in matches, because Anderson wasn't capable of performing at the elite solo level Windham occupied. This competitive tension revealed the internal hierarchy of the Horsemen. Every member was fighting to be number two behind Flair, and Windham resented that someone he viewed as inferior was treated as an equal. Tully Blanchard is the sixth name, And his inclusion makes sense given his partnership with Anderson. Windham found Blanchard arrogant and overly political. Blanchard was always angling for better positions and better money, often at the expense of group unity. Like Anderson, Blanchard's decision to jump to the WWF in 1988 felt like a betrayal to Windham. The Brainbusters left for individual gain, while Windham stayed loyal to WCW and the Horsemen concept. That loyalty cost Windham. Without Blanchard and Anderson, the stable lost its edge and its credibility. Windham was left to rebuild with lesser talent, while his former partners tried and ultimately failed to recreate their success in the WWF. The hate here was about abandoned loyalty. Windham believed in the group, but Blanchard only believed in himself. Sid Vicious is the seventh name, and this is where the hate becomes visceral and personal. Windham viewed Sid as the ultimate embodiment of muscle without brains. Sid had the look of a monster, but he possessed zero understanding of ring psychology or professional etiquette. The most infamous incident between them was the squeegee incident. During a backstage altercation involving other wrestlers, Sid stormed out of the room and returned holding a squeegee like a weapon. Windham witnessed this absurdity and immediately intervened. He disarmed Sid and reportedly threatened to shove the squeegee up his backside if he didn't calm down. This moment perfectly captured how Windham saw Sid: dangerous, stupid, and completely out of control. The squeegee incident became legendary in wrestling circles, but it wasn't funny to those who were there. It showed that Sid couldn't control his emotions even in professional settings. He would escalate situations to violence over minor disagreements. This made him a liability backstage where dozens of wrestlers, managers, and crew members were trying to do their jobs. Windham had grown up in a locker room culture where disputes were settled with words or, if necessary, with actual wrestling skill in the ring. Grabbing cleaning equipment as a weapon was beneath the dignity of the business. It was the behavior of someone who didn't understand or respect the unwritten rules that kept the wrestling community functioning. But the hate went beyond backstage drama. In the ring, Sid was genuinely inept. He couldn't call a match or remember sequences, which meant Windham had to guide him through every single spot. This put enormous pressure on Windham. He had to wrestle his own match while simultaneously feeding Sid instructions on what to do next. It was like performing brain surgery while also teaching someone how to hold the scalpel. Worse, Sid's power moves were clumsy and unsafe. Wrestling Sid meant risking real injury for no good reason. Other members of the Horsemen shared Windham's view. In DVD commentaries, they collectively buried Sid as an embarrassment to the legacy of the group. To a purist like Windham, having Sid in main events was an insult to every wrestler who had actually learned the trade. The hate was a rejection of incompetence being rewarded with prominence. Sid proved that in the new wrestling landscape, you didn't need skill or respect. You just needed size and a look. Brian Pillman is the eighth name, and this feud represents the death of tradition. Windham and Pillman teamed together as the Blondes, but their approaches to wrestling couldn't have been more different. Windham was a stoic traditionalist who believed in protecting the business. Pillman was the loose cannon who wanted to expose the business for shock value. As Pillman transitioned into his loose cannon gimmick, he would frequently shoot during live broadcasts, going off script to blur the lines between reality and fiction. For Windham, whose father Blackjack Mulligan had instilled a strict code of conduct, this behavior was unprofessional and dangerous. The problem with Pillman's approach was that it put everyone at risk. When one wrestler breaks kayfabe on live television, it makes every other wrestler's job harder. Fans start questioning what's real and what's scripted. They stop suspending disbelief. The magic of wrestling depends on maintaining certain boundaries, and Pillman was tearing those boundaries down for his own benefit. What made it worse was that Pillman was talented enough to succeed without these stunts. He could work a great match and cut a compelling promo using traditional methods, but he chose chaos instead, and that choice felt selfish to Windham. It was Pillman putting his own career ambitions above the health of the entire industry. Pillman's antics also brought heat onto his partners. His involvement in storylines like the Yellow Dog angle, where a banned Pillman wrestled under a mask, created chaos and unpredictability. Windham preferred a low profile and clean execution. He found Pillman's constant need to work the boys exhausting. While Windham respected Pillman's athleticism, he couldn't tolerate the disrespect for the traditions that held the locker room together. Pillman represented the new generation that didn't care about the old rules, and that made him a threat to everything Windham valued. Shane Douglas is the ninth name, and this was an ideological war. Douglas built his career in ECW by attacking the NWA legacy that Windham's family helped create. Douglas famously threw down the NWA World title and declared it dead. He publicly called legends like Ric Flair and the Windham's dinosaurs and outdated relics. For Windham, this wasn't just a promo, it was a personal insult to his family's heritage. His father, Blackjack Mulligan, had built his reputation in NWA territories. Windham himself had won the NWA World Heavyweight Championship and defended it with pride. Watching Douglas disrespect that lineage on national television felt like someone spitting on his family name. He felt Douglas in the ECW style lacked psychology, the ability to tell a logical story in the ring. Instead, they replaced storytelling with violence and shock value. Tables, chairs, and blood became substitutes for actual wrestling skill. Fans cheered for the carnage without understanding or appreciating the craft that men like Windham had spent years perfecting. This represented everything wrong with wrestling's evolution in Windham's mind. The animosity was mutual. Douglas accused Windham of being unreliable in shoot interviews. He detailed instances where Windham faked illnesses or disappeared for months to ride motorcycles instead of fulfilling bookings. Douglas believed Windham squandered his gifts due to lack of drive. Windham's hate for Douglas was defensive. Douglas represented the new breed of wrestler who had no respect for their elders, and Douglas saw Windham as a relic who refused to pass the torch or show up for work. It was a clash between two eras that could never coexist. Vader is the 10th and final name, and this rivalry was driven by physical revulsion and trauma. In candid interviews, Windham explicitly named Vader as the smelliest wrestler he ever faced. He claimed Vader never washed his gear, forcing opponents to grapple with a 400-pound man who reeked of sour sweat and mildew. This lack of hygiene was a profound professional discourtesy in Windham's eyes. Wrestling required close physical contact for extended periods. Being locked in holds with someone who refused to maintain basic cleanliness made the job almost unbearable. Other wrestlers had complained about Vader's hygiene, but Windham was among the most vocal. For someone who took pride in professionalism, Vader's refusal to wash his gear represented a fundamental lack of respect for the business and for his opponents. But far worse than the smell was Vader's stiffness. Vader worked incredibly stiff, meaning he struck opponents with legitimate force instead of pulling his punches. In wrestling, there's an unwritten rule about protecting your opponent. Moves are supposed to look devastating without causing real harm. Vader either didn't understand this concept or didn't care. He threw punches that legitimately connected. His power moves came down with full weight. Windham's feud with Vader in the early 90s resulted in severe physical trauma. Every match with Vader meant absorbing punishment that left bruises, cuts, and lingering pain for days afterward. The punishment Windham absorbed from Vader, combined with the knee injuries from Flair matches, accelerated the end of his prime. After his brutal run with Vader in 1993 and 94, Windham disappeared from wrestling for 2 full years to undergo multiple surgeries. He didn't view Vader as a monster heel. He viewed him as an unsafe worker who took years off his career through negligence and lack of control. The hate was rooted in survival. Vader represented the kind of dangerous, careless wrestling that shortened careers and left bodies permanently broken. Windham entered his matches with Vader knowing he would leave hurt. That's not storytelling. That's just violence with no purpose except to feed Vader's ego about being the toughest guy in the locker room. When you look at all 10 names together, a pattern emerges. These weren't random grudges. Each rivalry represented a specific way the wrestling business failed Barry Windham. Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes were the political gatekeepers who exploited his talent but capped his ceiling. Lex Luger and Sting were proof that image had triumphed over skill, making Windham's technical mastery irrelevant. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard showed that loyalty meant nothing when money was involved. Sid Vicious and Vader represented the physical dangers of a business that valued spectacle over safety. Shane Douglas and Brian Pillman symbolized a cultural shift that mocked the traditions Windham held sacred. Every name on this list took something from him: his health, his money, his legacy, or his dignity. Flair took his knees and his championship opportunity. Rhodes took his paychecks and his main event spots. Luger and Sting took the recognition he deserved. Anderson and Blanchard took his stable. Sid and Vader took years off his career with their incompetence and recklessness. Douglas and Pillman took the respect for tradition that made wrestling meaningful to him. And by the time Windham's career wound down, those losses had accumulated into a mountain of resentment he could never fully shake. The hate wasn't irrational. It was the natural response of someone who gave everything to a business that gave back nothing but broken promises and broken bones. The final insult came in 1996 when Windham returned to the WWF as the Stalker. After 2 years of knee rehabilitation, he needed work desperately, but the wrestling landscape had changed completely. He was given a bizarre gimmick involving camouflage face paint and a Forest Stalker persona. Windham hated the character and felt it was beneath a former NWA world champion. Vince McMahon McMahon, sensing the gimmick wasn't working, essentially starved Windham out of his contract by removing him from shows. Since Windham was paid per appearance, no bookings meant no income. This was the lowest point. A man who was supposed to be the face of the NWA was reduced to playing a ridiculous character before being quietly pushed out the door. The Stalker gimmick was humiliating on multiple levels. The face paint made him look like a joke. The backstory made no sense. The promos were awkward and forced. Windham knew it was terrible from the first time he looked in the mirror wearing the costume, but he needed the money. His medical bills from surgeries were piling up. His painkiller dependency meant he had ongoing pharmaceutical costs. He had a family to support, so he swallowed his pride and went out there as the Stalker, knowing that every appearance was damaging his legacy. Fans who remembered him as the smooth-working technical marvel now saw him as a green-faced weirdo stalking people in the woods. It erased years of credibility in a matter of weeks. The Stalker gimmick represented everything Windham had come to hate about wrestling. It was proof that the business had no respect for what he represented or what he had sacrificed. Vince McMahon didn't care that Windham was a former world champion or that he had put his body through hell for the industry. All McMahon saw was another body to plug into a bad gimmick. And when that gimmick failed, Windham was discarded without ceremony or appreciation. It was the final confirmation that loyalty and sacrifice meant nothing in modern wrestling. The business would take everything you had and give you nothing in return except a stupid costume and an empty bank account. So why did Barry Windham hate these 10 wrestlers? Because they were the architects of a wrestling world where someone like him no longer fit. A world where politics mattered more than talent, where looks mattered more than skill, where safety was secondary to spectacle, where tradition was something to mock instead of protect. Windham was a natural, a once-in-a-generation talent who should have been champion for years. Instead, he got broken knees, a painkiller dependency, and a camouflage suit. His withdrawal from the industry, often labeled as unreliability, was really a rejection. He couldn't stomach working in a business that had taken everything from him and given back nothing but pain. But here's what can't be taken away. Despite all the bitterness and all the grudges, Barry Windham's legacy as a performer remains undeniable. Those 60-minute classics with Flair, the iconic Horsemen run, the matches where he made everyone look like $1 million. Windham possessed a rare combination of size, speed, and technical mastery that wrestlers today still study. His ability to work any style against any opponent was legendary. Peers who worked with him, even the ones he had heat with, respected what he could do in that ring. The tragedy isn't that Windham hated these 10 wrestlers. The tragedy is that the business they all worked in chewed up one of its greatest talents and spit him out before he could reach his full potential. Windham deserved better. The fans deserved to see him as world champion for years, not months. And wrestling history would be richer if the politics, the injuries, and the changing times hadn't derailed what should have been a legendary career. So which rivalry on this list shocked you the most? Was it the physical destruction Flair caused? The political betrayal from Dusty? The incompetence of Sid? Drop a comment below and let me know. And make sure you're subscribed because we've got more untold wrestling stories coming that will change how you see the business. Thanks for watching.